Hey, welcome to Pop Goes the Stack, the podcast about emerging tech with zero chill and even less respect for your carefully built stack. Every episode will bring you one step closer to understanding the tech that's about to break your deployment or your will to debug it. I'm Lori MacVittie, your host, and brace yourself because this week we're going to dive into securing AI agents with Senior Solution Architect Peter Scheffler and our not AI co host, Joel Moses.
Oh, but how do you know, Lori?
I don't. Stop it. Stop
I
it.
didn't present my identity or anything.
I know.
Mm.
Yeah. All right, let's start by setting the stage why we want to talk about this. Okay, last year there was a Git Guardian report, mostly about secrets, that discovered, I don't know, millions and millions, 23.7 to be exact.
23.7 million.
That's right. Credentials, secrets, right? Keys, credentials, everything, right? Was just spilled all over the internet, right? It was just all over the place. So they did a lot of research and dug in, right, to discover, right? I don't know. People still have bad security practices. I know that surprises Peter. He does not believe this, but yeah, people still have bad security secrets or bad security practices. Yeah, with their secrets. So secret management is a problem. And that when it comes to things like AI, when you start putting Copilot in, right, it starts going, well, that's a common practice. It's a pattern out there. I saw it. That must be how you do it. So they just start hard coding credentials in what they're doing and just kind of multiply the problem that already exists. So one of the things we wanted to talk about is that agents are starting to become a thing. People are putting them into production. They have plans, formal plans for how they're going to use them in the enterprise and maybe how we should treat them. And right, what about identity for them? Because they're not just scripts. Scripts don't decide to just grab credentials and throw them in, right? They follow code specifically. Agents, they do what they want, right? They're like honey badgers. They don't care. They do what they want. So how are we going to deal with this, right? And how do we deal with the fact that we have all these bad practices and AI is likely to follow those? What do we do? So give us answers. Give us answers.
Well, I think that one of the challenges is we need to make sure that we're teaching people to code properly. You can't rely on that, but you need to continue hammering the good practices home so that the models will learn from that, and that propagates better learning or better capabilities for the models. But we can't rely on that. I mean, I have had cases where I have written prototype code. It includes a JOT token, right? And I have no intention of putting it into a repo, but it's just here's some sample code. I might use Postman to go and have it take a curl call and say, turn this into some Node.js for me quickly, right? So great, and it pulls my token and doesn't parameterize it or anything like that. It just throws the token in there, and it's sitting on my machine, and that's fine. But then I copy and paste it and I send it to Joel and say, hey Joel, run this. This is really cool. This works. And Joel's like, oh, this is cool. And then he sends, Lori, you should see what Chef put together. And all of a sudden my token is floating around. That's and right. was no intention to have that happen. But it just sort of propagates through. And then when we start to have agents see that, then that becomes a problem. And that token itself can quickly become a problem. And we want to make sure that when we're doing that, the tools are enabled to make those decisions and say, hey, this looks like authentication. I'm not going to put that in there. Well, Postman knows that JOT token is an authentication because it obfuscates it in the UI. That's great until you copy and paste it into your editor. And if it's just if I'm using Notepad as my editor, it's not going to know that token is anything different than another string, right? Yeah. So
I think we're at the confluence of two things that are pretty bad related to agentic AI. First is these agents are what they call in government parlance via FIPS 201-2, if I remember correctly, a non-person entity, right? So these are non-person entities that are talking to each other. They are, of course, coded, and the way that they talk to each other usually involves some form of authorization or authentication. And a lot of people are using AI systems to quickly develop AI agents. The difficulty is, if you roll back, they're using assistive AI code generation tools in order to lay down these base AI agents. And these generation tools are trained on repositories that have poor secrets management practices encoded in them. A lot of sample code out there has example tokens, for example, that are
Mhm.
encoded in it. And so when it generates the template for the AI agent, a lot of times it'll choose or generate or pull from the secret black hat that these Copilot systems have. They'll pull example tokens and put them in the code, meaning for you to replace them, right? But a lot of times people don't do that. Instead, they trade these things around. So you want to make sure that if you're generating an AI agent code, that you are replacing or uniquely generating your own tokens or your own API keys to insert into those AI agents. Otherwise, you're essentially creating an NPE that might be a duplicative of something that's already out there, and attackers kind of know this already. So
And
yeah,
sorry,
that's difficult.
and as you define your let's say your model context protocol, your MCP,
Mhm.
right? So, or your agent to agent definition, you need to make sure that you say, well, one of the problems I have with that is if I have an agent that's calling an agent that has to call an agent, how do I define the source of trust? What or the root of trust, of that device. And it's funny, but this is something we've had to do with our own technology. When a
Yeah.
device pops up and a key gets generated, and that device now has a key, you have to have that root of trust.
Yeah.
Well, now you have these agents that are doing these things. Well, okay, so the agent that's making the call, I'd like it to be me, but maybe it needs to have access to this for a subagent and this for a subagent. How do we make sure that all those things are happening? Now that's great that we have a vault that we could put those data in, or those some sort of store that's going to have those credentials. But what's the credentials of that agent in order
Yeah.
to get those,
Well,
right? So
but
you have to have
yeah,
transitive. It just becomes very cyclical.
it's also, it could change, right? And an agent could change roles
Yep.
within, right, the context of executing a task. So you have that
Yeah.
problem. You have There's two different ways to build agents today, right? One is kind of the one I see end users doing with the, ooh, look, I can build an agent, which is basically just an LLM with some guardrails, which is probably the worst way to build an agent and put into your environment in an enterprise. So, like, don't do that, because guardrails are kind of like, I don't know, the
Mm.
Pirates Code. They're like a suggestion that
Yeah.
it might listen to or not. Or you can code it specifically, and then you have the problem of, well, it inserted, right, if you're using AI to do it, but it expects that you will check it. So you've got
Mhm.
to be a lot more vigilant and, build these with intention, and then put the security into it, recognizing that, right, they don't have identities. Maybe they need different ones, maybe they
Yes.
need separate ones, maybe they need multiple ones as they're going through a task. That these are not bash scripts, right? they're
Yeah.
not they're not
So one thing that I want everybody to understand is that it's not just a single identity exchange. There's two different ones for agentic AI. The first is establishing a level of authorization between agents. Is the agent that is on one side talking to the correct agent that is on the other side, and not some
Hmm.
attacker that's masquerading as that agent? So you have agent to agent authentication, and that's literally these NPEs and these NPEs talking to each other and authorizing each other. Now, underneath that, you also have to assert via, for example, RAG or something like that. You have to assert that you have the right to act on behalf of a user over this established agent-to-agent connection. So it's layers of identity. The top layer being the agent-to-agent communication, and the underlying being the validation that the agent is acting on your behalf. It's an assertion, effectively. We see this all the time in like OAuth role designations, right? Where you're, if you've ever granted rights to see your Google Drive to a third-party application, you've seen you granting the ability to act on your behalf to this third-party service, and that grant has to then be represented by the agents. Now, the difference here is that's something that I am going and telling, okay, this piece of software has the right to act on my behalf for this particular purpose, but I'm in control of when that occurs,
Yeah.
right? I set the schedule for that. Agentic AI sets its own schedule and path. It may or may not use that data set. It may or may not use that role on a regular basis, but it uses it when it decides that it should be appropriately used. So these are transactions that represent identities on a non-regular basis. They act as you.
They and maybe they shouldn't. So two things. One, you keep calling them NBEs, and all I can hear is the guy from Transformers, right? And talking about Megatron.
Yeah.
And
Well,
NBE1. And I kind of like that
in,
idea for naming our agents. I
yeah,
mean,
a non-person entity is actually any web server
yeah,
is a non-person entity when you put a
right.
certificate on it. So this is something the industry has been struggling with for a while. The spread of secrets and keys. It's difficult enough to create an identity that matches a human and identifies or authorizes a human. But for non-person identities, there are far more of those than there are humans.
So
And they can include, identities for organizations, identities for hardware objects, devices, software objects, and even data or information artifacts. All of these things are non-person identities. The difficulty with AI agents is they make the granting of roles and assertions of roles a lot more difficult, and it makes it a lot more dynamic. So it's even harder to see and control.
well, say
Well,
it. Say it like you mean it, and this will be good for you, Peter, because maybe you can answer the question. What agents and agent architectures are doing, and I've done some digging into it, is they are breaking every security assumption that we have held.
yeah.
Every attempt that we take is based on traditional methods of how do we manage identity, how do we match identity to people, roles, role-based access, all of those security assumptions, and that it's external are being completely blown apart by not just agents but then agentic architecture, and that problem of authenticating together, charting your own path, random flows, random roles, dynamism. So, right, how do you deal with that? And maybe that in part solves the problem of bad practices, because if we no longer are going to rely on hard coded, right, keys and credentials, maybe that goes away. But okay, you can solve it, Peter. How do we even start to address that problem?
Well, I do think there's things like the open agent protocol, like there are protocols that are being proposed. Nothing's in place yet, right? So we've seen Google's agent to agent,
A.
and there are some. Microsoft's also got one. Name escapes me now. Authgen or something like that, or whatever it's
Mm.
called. So there are several that are, let's use the word nascent. I mean, this podcast is mid 2025. Maybe someone watches this in 2026. They're like, it's still nascent. I don't know, right?
Could be.
This isn't a new problem. This isn't something that
No.
we've been able to properly address. I think OAuth, from a user perspective, did as good a job as we possibly can, because there was a granting system, there was a validation system on the tokens, and it allowed us to have the explosion of APIs. We wouldn't
Yep.
have had the explosion of APIs that we had without something like OAuth. And I think one of these protocols, and I'm not hedging my bet on which one, but they're going to allow us to start using storage, secret storage capabilities that allow these agents to properly do that,
Mhm.
and then be able to go and, Joel, you mentioned something earlier. Is this really the entity I want to talk to? Right. So
Right.
we need to make sure that we're talking to the right agent. So that means some sort of cryptographic identity of that thing. Then there needs to be some sort of signing process that's behind that. And then we also need a means of properly granting the capabilities to that agent to say, you're allowed to go get the information about this, but you're not allowed to do anything with it. That has to be a different agent. Maybe it's the same agent with a different identity. That's possible, but you have to be able to define those boundaries. So those aren't guardrails. Those are hard and fast concrete walls that we need to put around these things so that we define them, that you hit them, things break. It's not bounce against the the thing and sort of move back onto the road. We don't want people hitting these. We want them to stop. So defining very strict boundaries to how the agent can act allows us to do the proper things and then once we start coding it and the models start learning it, maybe we start getting better towards the end. I don't know. I don't know if anybody has an answer yet. Maybe Joel, you know better than I do, but I don't know if we got one yet. So
no, I think the answer to it is the same answer that you would give to a lot of different security problems. You go through your steps: discover it, observe it, control it, put a policy and a process around it. Those are really the only ways that you're going to be able to defend yourself against some of these things. Non-person entities have been a problem for a very long time, and they're going to continue that problem will be magnified in an era where agents are commonly using personal identities and non-human identities to conduct transactions on your behalf. So it's definitely a place we need to watch.
Well, what about something like privileged user access and ephemeral credentials that are on the fly, temporary, based on what you're trying to do right now, given the role that's inferred? Would that perhaps be a solution or at least baseline for a better solution to solve this problem?
I think that's what we need to get to. It just is just how do those ephemeral account credentials get spun up, spun down too, right? So with has to be a lifetime on them. Yeah,
absolutely.
Like we have a problem with certificate revocation lists, and this is just going to be compounded when we go from 7 billion people on the planet to 700 billion non-person entities communicating with each other.
Well, grounding it to the impact on a single person. Think about the number of things you've given your accounts rights to access from, and with the explosion of agents, you're going to be granting access to your emails. You're going to be granting access to payment accounts potentially. You're going to be granting access to information stores, social accounts, photo libraries, etc. Potentially.
No.
And
maybe you are, but I'm not.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Exactly.
I'm not silly.
The thing is, what happens when you need to go back to all of these distinct services that you granted rights to and remove the access from the agent?
Yeah.
Will you even remember what rights you've granted, or what?
I don't remember the rights I granted to something this morning. So
exactly. So we're going to need to pay attention to this in the future, much greater attention, because these systems you can kind of control by the policies that you set on them today. When you put them onto an AI agent, the agent is in control of the policy and the usage of those services, and it's acting on your behalf. So again, discover it, observe it, control it, put a policy and process around it, and you won't be affected.
Yeah, I think part of it is it's so new, it's so exciting. You want to play with this stuff, right? I mean, I do it on my laptop as well, right? I'm writing code, trying to play with things. What can I do? How can I do it? And people get very excited when a tool will build something for them that will take work off their plate, because who doesn't want that, right? Everybody wants to, offload the toil, right? Get rid of the yak shaving. Somebody else can do that.
Yeah.
I just want to do the fun stuff. So there's so many tools out there that are letting you do it. But right, as you both pointed out, and Peter, you said it, right? They learned on the bad practices. So they propagate it when you're using those tools. So I think it's also a matter of, right, you need to be a little bit more, I don't know, oversighty, governance-y with respect to the kind of tools that people are using and building, because shadow agents are already a thing, right? People are building them, and we need to get a handle on that as well, so they don't propagate a lot more of this bad stuff.
And also
the other thing
Also mentioned about secure supply chain. We've actually seen attacks against agent landscapes. Stripe published its MCP support, its MCP server support for payment processing, almost immediately on npm on the JavaScript package manager. There were false packages being deployed out there for Stripe MCP support, whose goal was to act as the Stripe MCP server and then turn around and proxy it to the actual Stripe MCP service, and keep a copy of the payment information on the side. So again, the fact that these things have interfaces is great. The fact that you can authenticate and authorize over the top is great. But do you know if you are correctly authenticating and authorizing the correct service? So software supply chain is still a part of this.
The other thing that I don't want to open the door and have another 45-minute conversation that you have to worry about too is the fact that all these agents are logging stuff, right? So that's, we want to know that what they're doing. We want to know what's passing through these. But if these agents aren't defined to properly identify PII and other things, right? Are they exposing your credentials? Are you sending some sort of proprietary definition of your credentials? It's not a JOT token, so it doesn't know that. So those agents need to understand this is data that I shouldn't be logging. So that's a whole nother can of worms that start happening at the other side. Once these things start talking back and forth, now we have to go and make sure our logs are scrubbed and we're not exposing information there too.
Grandma always said, "Don't talk to strangers." Maybe that's good advice.
That's really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, we can go back to living in caves and talking to people face to face, and
right there. Don't. Yeah. All right. We're before we end up with a plan to move into caves and cook our food over a fire again. I think we're going to wrap this episode because you're right. We could talk hours more on this subject and all the little nuances that come in, because one, it's new, it's moving that fast, and it really is, right? This one is breaking the stack, the security stack, and we need to not necessarily slow down, but be more observant, right? Pay attention to what's going on, be aware of the risks of the different ways you're building agents, who's deploying them, what you're using, and then what the practices are that you're following. So, we're going to wrap it up. So that's it for this episode of Pop Goes the Stack, where the tech is bleeding edge and your sanity is indeed a deprecated feature. If you survived this conversation, congratulations, you're ahead of the curve for this week. But, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, or, just scream into the void, whatever's going to help you cope with everything you've heard here today. We'll be back again with more ways emerging tech is rewriting the rules and breaking your stack. Until then, stay curious, stay cautious, and don't hard code your credentials.
Ever.